Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Gamez According to Jaymz. I am Jaymz, and on this episode, we're going to discuss community. Now, I was born in the 1970s and did most of my growing up in the 1980s. So, back in the 70s, D&D, which is obviously the 900-pound gorilla and grandfather of them all, was a new thing by and large. And then through a good chunk of the 80s is when we had the satanic panic around role-playing games. Not that there were a lot of them, there were some, but it was still a thing. And the whole satanic panic caused it to be fairly difficult to even know about these games. I myself didn't really even know what role-playing games were till about 1986, 1987. And my first exposure of such was literally an ad on the back of a comic book I bought for TSR's top secret SI role-playing game. And it had ads for one of the other box set expansions for it. And that was actually my first role-playing game that I bought. Frankly, the system still stands up pretty well to this day if you read through it. But I really didn't have anybody to play with because to have a community, there really weren't such things back then. It was more you had either know somebody or know somebody who knew somebody that could hook you up, or get invited to join a game by someone you knew that thought you might like it, things like that. And while I did know somebody who played games, I think they're the ones who exposed me to, I think it was the first edition of Shadowrun and the earlier versions of Palladium's Ninjas and Super Spies, for example. But again, you couldn't just, at the time, transit wasn't what it was. And, like in high school, particularly in my case, a Catholic high school, basically the entire town I was living in went pretty much to this high school. So you were at one edge of town and they were at the other edge of town and trying to get together. And especially through high school when you're getting your part-time jobs and all that stuff, it was actually pretty difficult. Now, heading into the 90s, it started getting a little easier because, a few more comic book stores and hobby stores were starting to carry this stuff. But again, to have an actual community was, it wasn't an easy thing. A lot of times you would have to post a flyer or post your name up looking for a game, or your game was looking for somebody at your local hobby shop or comic book store. Excuse me. And, it'd be the old style flyer. You could still see some of them occasionally on like a light standard or whatever. And with the little tab for a phone number or whatever the case is. And then into the later 90s, you could put your email address or something along those lines, because this is how it effectively continued for a number of years. You kind of had to just throw a dart at the dartboard and hope you hit something, kind of thing, right? So, like, I managed to find a group, and it was through people at work who they were already playing, so they invited me to take part, and I still am in touch with at least one of them today. My best friend is somebody I met through the 90s via a database, through a website of all things, that we just happened to live close together. So we hooked up to play, and next thing you know, like, here we are 26 years later, 25 years later, best friends. So it wasn't that you couldn't do it. It was difficult, and it wasn't something that you could easily find. Again, you kind of had to know somebody or know somebody who knew somebody. Now, that's not to say you couldn't find a game. Obviously, I could. I played in several. But it's just that it wasn't like it is today, where you just hop online, look for a Facebook group or a Discord, or hop on Twitter and find somebody to follow or a group to follow, or so on and so forth. That's where, like, today is so much easier, particularly trying to get into a game, because you can kind of get into a game via email, or again on Discord or on Facebook, or, you know, a group will set up a game so you can play on something like Roll D20 and things along those lines. And it's one of those things where today it really is so much easier than it was 20 years ago, let alone 30 or 40 years ago. Add in the fact there's such a plethora of product and things now too. Whereas a community 20 years ago might have been just a general gaming community. Now you kind of have a lot of sub communities specific for certain games or certain styles of games. So you have role-playing groups, and within that you have your D&D groups and your Shadowrun groups and your Palladium groups and your Pathfinder groups, etc., etc. And then over on the other side, you'll have a wargaming group, but below that you'll have Warhammer 40K, you'll have BattleTech, you'll have Flames of War, or Star Wars X-Wing, in these specifics that it breaks right down. And with today's internet and technology, it's not hard to get something like Tabletop Simulator and then play a game of X-Wing with somebody who lives in like Japan. And now, okay, time schedule is probably an issue, but that's the thing with today's communities. A lot of the communities are now global, where like even 20 years ago, it was an effort to have one in your town. And now you can easily have one that is a global community. Which that has its ups and its downs, because the more people you have, the more likely you're going to have jerks in those groups, et cetera, et cetera. But really, I'd have to say, with the way things are today, that it is kind of the best of times and the worst of times for gaming in that regard. Because not only do you find lots of good people, but a lot of bad people can interject their voice too. But now that's the same thing for almost anything: politics, sports, whatever recreation you may have, even with your job and such too. So it's not like it's direct to gaming, but the whole idea of this global community now, whereas 20 years ago was almost like more of a neighborhood community with some ties to a bigger world via news groups or message boards and such, prior to the advent of like Facebook and then again Twitter, Instagram, and Discord. That's not to say that's not a bad thing. It really isn't. Most of my gaming interaction now, I'd say 95% of it is through Facebook or Discord. Not so much Twitter and Instagram, but Facebook and Discord definitely covers a good 95% of my gaming interaction. I don't game a lot, but I still work on gaming materials and doing gaming content, such as this podcast. But it is frustrating sometimes, because, you know, you get on there and certain people will have an opinion, and it's like anything, right? You're gonna have some saying good, some saying bad, some trashing something, some loving something. And I like to generally think I'm somewhere in the middle, and I think most people are. It's usually the most vocal of the extremes that you hear the most of. But by and large, I still think today's environment is probably the most conducive to growing the various games. I play RPGs. I play war games, not so much board games, but or video games for that matter. But all of it, especially video games, have really turned into this monstrous community that is global. Like earlier today, my kids were playing Mario Kart. There was my daughter, my son, and they were playing some guy from Mexico. Like, that couldn't happen 20 years ago. Not really. Not without a lot of effort, particularly with video gaming systems or anything else for that matter. You know, like the instant communication of a Discord and a Facebook it allows for real-time games to happen via text, where back in the day it was on a message board and the person would have to be on, or it'd be via email, which was just snail's pace like you wouldn't believe. So in regards to communities, it is so easy now to set up a community and have people interact and have a good flow of ideas and opinions, good or bad, because even bad opinions can have a kernel of something in them. But it's just something I would have been envious of back in the late 80s when I first started learning about role-playing games. Like, to have the access to that kind of a community then just would have been amazing. And it was just between the tail end of the satanic panic and, you know, parents of the day not understanding, you know, what these things were. Very much like the parents of the day shitting on video games and the advent of computer use and early days of the internet and things like that, right? Like, parents didn't understand. That generation didn't get it. And I think that's why a lot of kids today, they're benefiting from, like, my generation kind of growing up through the evolution and development of these technologies and these games, because those of us who got into it, we get it. Like, I used to be a video gamer. I stopped probably around, I want to say by the time the PS1 came out, I kind of, myself personally aged out. I just didn't have the time or energy or inclination, especially with having a young daughter and another daughter on the way. But, excuse me. But by and large, I think kids who game today that had gamer parents benefit from the evolution that we lived through, because we got it. We understood. While in our day, when we were kids, our parents or grandparents, as the case may be, or even older siblings, just didn't get it. They didn't understand. So to me, that's why, like, today is probably the best of times for gaming. And again, the worst of times too, because you're always going to have jerks, and the more people you have, the more jerks you have, right? So that's just, you know, that's just the reality of things when it comes to community. But community should be a good thing. It usually is. And, you know, like, the way things are now, it's to the point where you can pick and choose what communities you want to be part of, especially online. Obviously local, it's not so easy. But at least you can avoid places with the people you don't want to interact with, and go to the places you can and want to interact, online anyway. Now, and that was the thing, like that was the thing back in the day, was if you found a community, that's pretty much all you had. And so it didn't matter who was in it. That was the only community you had. And so if you wanted to play, you kind of had to, you know, bite the bullet, turn a blind eye, and things like that. Especially when you were younger, it's like, I found a place I want to be, and these people here are kind of sucking the life out of it, but I have nowhere else to go. So thankfully online, that kind of issue is easily dealt with. You just stop going, you find another community. And there's lots of them all over the internet now. So that also adds to this is the best of times for gaming. I know locally, we have a number of groups. Some get to play. Most of us are adults, so with kids and wives or husbands or spouses, I should say. So time is at a premium, but a lot of us still talk gaming. So the community's not just there to play. Like, that's the thing with the community. It's not just there for playing. It's there for bouncing ideas. It's there for customizing rules. It's there for just talking even about the fluff within the environment of the game, the setting, if you will. And that, to me, I get more out of that than I do even playing the game. It's like I've said to my best friend and the people we generally play with when we do get together. Like, I don't even care if we get halfway through an adventure. I don't care if we even get out of the opening scenario. I'm there now for the camaraderie and to have fun. If I want to play serious, then I get into a serious game. Like, and that's the intention from the get-go. But when it's a throw together game just to get together, I'm not too serious about it. And neither are the rest of us. We're there to have a good time and hang out more than anything else. The game is actually secondary. But that's the way community is, right? You can have your serious games. You can have your fun games where it's not really relevant to what's going on. But today that's allowed to happen because of a lot of the evolution, especially over the last 20 years. So that's the thing there. Now, I talk about community and all this stuff, but it's like you also have to ask yourself, what do you want from your community? And that's an important thing, because if you don't know what you want, then it's hard to get into it. It's hard to participate and contribute because you're not really sure what you're looking for. Excuse me. But when it comes to a community, I look for certain things. I look for a community to have people that are willing to help, people that are willing to teach, people that are willing to listen, by and large. And of course, are friendly. Now, you're obviously going to get some people that aren't good teachers, but are willing to teach. You have some people who are probably good teachers, but aren't willing to teach. And you also have people who they don't have the patience to deal with new players. The other part too is I always have more than enough stuff, at least for the games where I don't have to worry about having a specific army or something. I usually have enough stuff that if somebody wants to try a game out, I can set them up to play. Obviously, I'm not going to give them my stuff, but I can set up a game to do a demonstration for them in which they can play one thing, I can play another, and we go from there. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. And that's also what community should be about. It should be about, accepting and welcoming new players, not being elitist and say, well, this is our thing. What do you want? And I've encountered those people too. And we have some locally that are like that, which is unfortunate because it does kind of put a damper on trying to grow your own community. Like the basic idea of a community should be the more the merrier. The more people you have, the more people you can play with, the more exposure you get to different ideas and opinions and discussions of all kinds of things, be it gaming or even real life. And it's unfortunate that you're always going to have people who feel the need to gatekeep, and gatekeeping sucks. It really does. Like if you've got, I'll use X-Wing as an example. X-Wing is actually a really good example for this. So X-Wing has a very strong tournament community. It lends itself to that. It has a very strong tournament community, but it also has a very strong casual play community. And when I say casual play, it's just people who want to put chips on the table. They're not super concerned about the rules. Like they know the rules. They're not hardcore about, that rule on is an exception for this and this and this. It's like, you know what? I'm not too worried about it. Where the tournament players are really, a lot of them are hardcore and they don't like playing casual players because they want other tournament players to test their skills against. Like one of the things that drives tournament players crazy, because many will specifically measure things out when setting up the table, is if their opponent just randomly tosses it on the table because it throws their entire strategy out of whack because they're used to playing other tournament people. And I found in a lot of instances that the more competitive players, tend to gatekeep to some degree over the casual players, because the casual players just want to have fun by and large. And it's unfortunate. And that happens in other games too, especially it's more a wargaming thing, but I've seen it happen with role-playing games as well. I'm not sure about video games. I don't do a lot of video games, so it's hard to say what that community's like. But I know with wargaming, there are definitely two distinct camps, the casual players and the competitive players. And they do tend to clash on occasion. And I see more gatekeeping from the competitive players because they want to play other competitive players. So, and they tend to lean towards wanting things to cater to their competitive play, whereas casual players they just want a place to play. So I've noticed in these communities that there's two distinctive groups that are kind of like sub communities within the community, which is unfortunate. That's not to say there aren't competitive players who are welcoming and willing to teach and help, but it's just from my own experience in the different games that have competitive components that they tend to be more of a gatekeep. And that's a turnoff for me, and it's a turnoff for a lot of people in general. And it's not just X-Wing. I've seen it in Armada. I've seen it with Legion. I've seen it Flames of War and Warhammer 40K and Battletech online in the various groups. And it's just, it's a clashing of ideology as to what the purpose of the game is. And that's unfortunate for the community because, again, I think a strong accepting community will be much more successful than one that is kind of divided over core philosophies. So all I can say is, you know, try to find what fits for you. And online, that's pretty easy because, for example, you type in D&D and you're going to find God knows how many groups you'll find that you can connect with. And a number of them are starting to run Discord servers now. Twitter's a little harder because just the filtering of how to go about it. And it's not conducive to conversation really, whereas Discord and Facebook very much are. But I would, the first thing you need to do when looking for a community is decide what you're looking for. Like if you're new, you need to find one that is willing to teach and kind of show you the ropes and like take you under a wing to kind of guide you where you need to be. Because I've noticed in even some of the groups I run that when someone asks a simple question, they'll get like 15 different answers. It's like, and none of the answers actually answer the question. They go off on tangents, and that's hard for people, especially new. So it's like, you got to keep in mind that new people, this hobby will not grow without new people. You need an influx of constantly new people year after year after year, or your game or your community is just going to die out at some point. We're not like all going to live forever here, you know? So it's such a great time to be a gamer, but it can be really difficult too because of people that gatekeep or feel elitist that, well, you know, I've been playing for 20 years. I'm like, yeah. And I've managed to show people that, yeah, and you've been playing wrong. Like that you've been running this rule wrong. And then you get other people like, yeah, that's not how that works. And then they get all indignant and they try to flex. Well, I've been playing it that way for 20 years. It must be right. And that's the kind of thing you run into. That's the negative side of communities, because you're going to have people clash. So the key is, like I said, you need to decide what you're looking for. And then, you know, like kind of take a seat to the side and observe for a while before diving in contributing or interacting right away, so that you can kind of get a lay of the land. And you know what? You'll see the people that are helpful. You'll see the people that are welcoming and willing to guide somebody. And you'll see the people who aren't. Then you can decide who to interact with, and then you can decide if that group's for you. Because some groups will have more of one than the other and vice versa. And that's kind of what you have to kind of wade through. And that's one of the downsides of today's community and environment, is the fact that there is a lot to wade through sometimes depending on what you're playing. Again, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Warhammer 40K, these are the big boys of gaming, and trying to wade your way through it to find where your people, for lack of a better term, takes time, and you got to have some patience, and you'll find your way. It's just patience is really what's needed. Now, if you're competitive, then you're going to fall in with competitive people. If you're casual, you're going to fall in with casual, obviously. Personally, I tend to gravitate towards the people in a community who are there to have fun and aren't worried about whether something is painted accurately or painted at all, for that matter. Or doesn't care that you're using a piece of cardboard with a picture of what you're using so you can try it out, because you don't want to spend 15, 20 bucks on a miniature if you're not going to have fun using that miniature. So you're trying it out. There are people who crap on that. They don't want anything to do with it. They won't even play you. Hell, I know people who won't even play someone if their army isn't painted for wargaming, you know? So those are the kind of things you're kind of trying to navigate through. But all in all, finding a good community, there's almost nothing better than if you can find yourself a good community to be part of for something you love. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. If you find a really good community that you can contribute to, that you can interact with, and it's for something you're passionate about and enjoy and love, you will get so much out of it. It's awesome. It really is. But you know, I've rambled on long enough. This has been going on for 26 minutes now. So to recap, you know, like back in the day, it was really hard to find a community because between parents and Satanic Panic and everything else, and then up through the 90s and stuff, while not as difficult, was still not easy. You know, like today it is leaps and bounds beyond what people of my generation, when we got into gaming 30 plus years ago, could have ever imagined. It's just phenomenal. Now, and then also, as a secondary recap, like if you're new to gaming or you're new to a game, look for that community that is going to be open and welcoming and accepting, and, you know, like take you under a wing if necessary, especially if you're new to gaming in general, because a lot of these things are all a new concept to you. Look for the people that are willing to help you and guide you along where you need to go in order to become one of the other people who is a contributing member of the community. Because, you know, and then eventually you'll become, you know, that person who guides another who comes along. And only through those kind of actions and those interactions and those kind of contributions can our hobbies, role-playing games, board games, video games, war games, even communities for creative writing or whatever community it is, that's the only way our hobbies can continue to survive and grow and be successful. So with that, I'm James. This has been Gamez According to Jaymz. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next time. Cheers.